My stepson walked in on me undressing at the cabin. You won't believe what he said next. I didn't scream. I didn't cover myself. I just stood there, my heart pounding. He didn't turn away, but he said something that made me lose my belief that I was invisible. And since then, I haven't been able to sleep well again. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of nothing. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, just trees, wind, and stillness. Most people would call it peaceful. I called it numb. My husband, Ethan, insisted we come here every spring. A retreat, he said, a reset, but nothing really reset anymore. Ethan was the kind of man people respected. Calm, capable, the reliable type. He provided well. He never yelled, never drank too much, never forgot birthdays, and yet, something was missing. Or maybe, I was the one missing from my own life. He said I was lucky. That I had everything a woman could want. A house, a husband, stability. But I had become so good at pretending, at playing the role of the grateful wife, that I couldn't tell when the performance ended and the silence began. Ethan loved the quiet. I used to, before it started to feel like I was disappearing into it. In the mornings, he would rise early, make his coffee, and sit on the porch with his tablet. No words, no questions, just silence between us, stretched out like an invisible wall. He thought peace meant nothing was wrong. But I knew better. I'd go through the motions, make the bed, fold the towels, light a candle in the corner of the kitchen, like I was trying to bring warmth into something long since cooled. That week, the plan was just the two of us. But the night before we left, he told me Tyler would be joining us. He needs space, Ethan said over dinner, some time away from his mother. Tyler, his son from a previous marriage. I hadn't seen him in nearly 3 years. Last I heard, he was living in Seattle. I said nothing, just nodded, like it didn't matter. But something inside me shifted. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape. It turned out to be something else entirely. The first time I saw Tyler again, he was standing at the edge of the gravel driveway, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His hoodie pulled halfway up like he hadn't decided whether he was staying or just passing through. He looked older than I remembered, taller, leaner, with a shadow of stubble and eyes that seemed quieter, darker somehow. The last time I saw him, he was 19 and angry. Now he was 25 and unreadable. Hey, he said simply. Hi, I replied, trying to keep my voice casual, even though I felt something in me tighten. Ethan walked out behind me, arms open. Glad you made it, son. Tyler nodded, letting his father pull him in. Their hug was stiff, formal, more like an obligation than affection. I pretended not to notice and offered to help with his bag. He followed me inside. The cabin felt smaller with him in it, not physically, but energetically, as if the air had changed. The silence wasn't soft anymore, it hummed with something unsaid. Your room's the one at the end of the hall, I said, placing his bag near the door. Same one you had when you were younger. He looked around. Nothing's changed. No, I said quietly, not much does. That night, we had dinner together, the three of us at the long wooden table. Ethan talked about work, about stocks and markets and some friend who'd bought a boat. I nodded at all the right moments. Tyler didn't say much. He pushed food around his plate, glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. At one point, Ethan left to take a call. It was just me and Tyler in the dining room. I was refilling the water pitcher when I felt his eyes on me, direct, unfiltered. You look different, he said. I turned to face him. Different how? I don't know, just not how I remember. I gave a small smile. Well, people change. Some people do, he said, leaning back. Some just get better at hiding. Before I could respond, Ethan re-entered. Conversation shifted, but something had already tilted inside me. It wasn't what Tyler said. It was the way he looked at me when he said it, like he saw through everything I'd carefully put in place. Over the next few days, Tyler settled in like he'd always belonged there. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were clipped. Deliberate, with just enough weight to make them echo long after they were spoken. He woke early, went on long runs, came back sweaty and quiet, his earbuds in, his shirt clinging to him like second skin. I told myself not to notice. But I did. I noticed everything, how he'd pause before heading upstairs, how his eyes would briefly search for mine when he entered a room, how his presence made even the simplest moments feel like they meant something more. One morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee. The sun had barely crept through the trees, casting long, golden slivers across the wooden floor. The cabin was still. Ethan was out on a hike. I was alone, or so I thought. I reached up to grab a mug, and as I turned, I startled. Tyler stood in the doorway, damp from his run, breath steady, eyes locked on mine. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice low, a little amused. I shook my head. "You didn't." He stepped closer, just a little. "Smells good." "The coffee?" He nodded. "Yeah, you always made it better than Dad did." I laughed softly. "The machine does most of the work." He held my gaze. "I don't think it's the machine." There was a beat of silence, just long enough to make the air feel heavier. He moved to the fridge, pulled out water, leaned against the counter like it was his home. It had once been, in a way. I busied myself with the coffee, trying to shake the static crawling over my skin. "You sleep okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "Hard to sleep in a place with so many memories." I wasn't sure what to say to that. He glanced at me again, slower this time. "You've changed." I tried to smile. "Life does that." "No," he said, "it's not life. It's you. You carry things differently now." I gripped the edge of the counter. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away, just sipped his water, then said, "You look like someone who's forgotten what it's like to be seen." The words landed hard. I froze. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just talking about me. He was seeing me. And maybe that's what terrified me most. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ethan lay beside me, snoring softly, the same rhythm I'd heard for over a decade. It used to comfort me. Now, it just reminded me how long it had been since I felt anything in that bed besides stillness. I stared at the ceiling, eyes open in the dark, replaying Tyler's words again and again. "You look like someone who's forgotten what it's like to be seen." He didn't touch me, didn't even come close, and yet, I felt more exposed than if he had. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't supposed to feel anything for him. He was Ethan's son. He used to call me by my first name. Then eventually, Marissa. Always with a teenage shrug and an eye roll. I helped him with his college applications. I made him soup when he had the flu. I watched him grow into a man. And now that man was looking at me like he knew something I didn't want to admit. I hated that he made me feel this way. I hated that I noticed the way his voice dropped when we were alone. I hated how alive I suddenly felt when he entered a room. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't unfaithful. But somewhere along the line, I had stopped being seen. And when someone finally did, even if it was someone I shouldn't let in, it cracked something open. The next morning, I avoided him. I stayed in my room longer than usual. Claimed a headache. When I finally emerged, he was already gone for a run. I exhaled, ashamed of how much relief that brought. And yet, when I heard the door creak open 30 minutes later, I found myself checking my reflection in the mirror before heading back down. I didn't want him to notice me. But I didn't want him to stop noticing me either. And that, more than anything, was the part one couldn't say out loud. It happened on the 4th day. Ethan had gone into town to pick up some supplies, leaving Tyler and me alone at the cabin. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting moving shadows across the walls. I was in our bedroom, changing clothes after a shower. The door was closed, but not locked. It never was out there. There was never a reason. Until that day. I had just slipped on a simple cotton dress when I heard the doorknob turn. Marissa? Tyler's voice. I turned instinctively, dress only half-zipped. The door opened before I could respond. He stepped in and froze. We both did. Time didn't move, or maybe it accelerated. My first instinct was to grab the nearest blanket, scream, run, but none of that happened. I stood still, breath caught in my chest. The sunlight caught the edge of the mirror, reflecting back both our faces. His was unreadable. Mine, I didn't want to know. He didn't avert his eyes. He didn't leave. He just stood there. And then, he spoke. You don't have to hide from me. His voice was low, not rushed, almost gentle. I finally moved, just enough to pull the zipper the rest of the way. Not enough to break the moment. You should have knocked, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I did, he replied, quietly. You didn't answer. I looked down at the floor, willing my heart to slow. I'll go, he said, but didn't move. Instead, he took one step forward. I raised my hand, not in protest, not in defense, just to hold something between us. Nothing physical, just space. He stopped. And then, with a look I'll never forget, he added, I didn't come in by accident. A pause. I needed to know if it was just me. I said nothing. I couldn't. The air in the room felt too thick to breathe. Our eyes met, one of those glances that feels like a door swinging open with no one willing to close it. Then he turned and left. No touch, no kiss, just silence. But somehow, that moment, the unspoken heat, the tension, the choice not taken, burned more than anything physical could have. And I knew, deep down, something between us had changed. And there would be no going back. After that afternoon, the air inside the cabin changed. Tyler and I didn't speak about what happened. We didn't have to. The silence said more than words ever could. It stretched between us like a fragile thread, too thin to see, too tense to ignore. Ethan returned that evening, arms full of groceries and casual stories from town. I smiled, nodded, helped unpack. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I was unraveling. Tyler avoided me for the rest of the night. Not in a cold or angry way, just distant, detached. He ate quickly, offered a quiet, good night, and disappeared into his room. I stood in the kitchen long after Ethan had gone to bed, staring at the kettle as it whistled, letting it scream a little longer than necessary. That night in bed, Ethan reached for me, a gentle touch on my shoulder, a kiss on my neck. Familiar, routine. I closed my eyes and tried to lean into it, to feel what I used to feel. But all I could think about was the look in Tyler's eyes. Not lust. Not desire. Recognition. He saw something I hadn't shown anyone in years, something Ethan never bothered to look for. I turned to my side, feigning sleep. Ethan sighed and settled in, never noticing the tears gathering quietly in my eyes. Over the next few days, Tyler and I barely spoke. When we did, it was surface level, polite, but our eyes betrayed us, every glance an echo of what almost happened. I caught myself listening for his footsteps, watching for the flash of his shadow in the hallway. I hated that I waited for those small moments, hated that they mattered so much. And still, every time they came, I felt something flicker, something alive, something I couldn't name without shame. We hadn't crossed the line. But the space between almost and never was growing smaller by the day. And in that unspoken space, I was no longer sure who I was anymore. The last evening arrived quietly. There was no announcement, no warning, just a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the forest outside had gone still. Listening. Ethan suggested we have one final dinner together before we left the cabin. A proper send-off, he called it. He grilled steaks, opened a bottle of wine, lit candles. Even, I played along, smiling when I was supposed to, laughing at stories I'd already heard before. Tyler sat across from me, his eyes mostly on his plate, When they weren't, they drifted past me, never quite landing, like he was afraid of what might happen if they did. Ethan, oblivious, toasted to peaceful getaways and new beginnings. I raised my glass. So did Tyler. But I tasted nothing. After dinner, Ethan retired early, claiming a headache. That left just the two of us in the quiet kitchen, cleaning plates, wiping down counters, both pretending this was normal. I'm leaving tomorrow, Tyler said suddenly. I paused, dish towel in hand. Back to Seattle? He nodded. Yeah, this wasn't what I expected. What did you expect? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He looked at me then. Really looked. Closure. Distance. I thought coming here would make everything feel simpler. And did it? His laugh was soft, bitter. No, it made it worse. I turned away, folding the towel slowly. Maybe that means it mattered. There was a long silence. I never wanted to make things hard for you, he said. You didn't, I lied. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough for his presence to register. My heart stuttered. I think you needed someone to see you, he said quietly, not in the way I did. Just to notice, to remind you you're still here. My eyes burned. And I think, he continued, you reminded me that I'm not just a shadow of someone else. We stood like that for what felt like hours, the air heavy with everything unsaid. He didn't try to touch me. I didn't ask him to stay. And yet, when he walked out of the kitchen that night, something left with him. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. His room was clean, bed made, no note, no goodbye. Just silence. I wandered into the living room, coffee in hand, still in my robe. The fire had gone out hours ago. A cold breeze slipped through the cracked window, brushing against my skin like memory. I sat down, staring at the mug in my hands, wondering if I should be grateful nothing happened. But all I could think was, if it happened again, would I still walk away?